How do we cross the line?
This is going to be awesome. I hope you'll be here tonight at 5 o'clock. We're going to have a big party. We're going to have a celebration. We're going to have music. We're going to have food. We're going to celebrate the things that are going on through you, through our congregation, the things we don't normally take the time to hear about and to celebrate. We're going to do that tonight. We're going to have a big old party tonight, 5 o'clock. But just so you know that this isn't some kind of bait and switch, I'm going to ask you to bring something. I'm going to ask you to come tonight and bring your nothing. Bring your nothing tonight. Because tonight is a celebration of our nothing. A couple weeks ago, we began a conversation, and we talked about making a difference in the world. In the last 2 weeks, Lee Congdon and Scott Vermillion filled in for me. Can you applaud for them and thank them for their teaching? I hope you always receive other voices. It's always good. It's not good for us to kind of be dialed into a singular voice. And when you have talented people like Lee and Scott, it's great to have them share. And they contributed to the conversation about what it means to cross the line. Because I suggested that in order for us to make a difference in the world, we have to cross the line. We have to press into those boundaries, those limitations, those walls between us and them, between insiders and outsiders, between believers and unbelievers. We have to go where we're disinclined to go. We have to go where Jesus went. And we have to cross those lines. And so in order to make a difference in the world that we live in, I suggested we have to cross these difficult lines. And today we want to cross the last line. And the last line is actually the first line. This is where making a difference begins. And it is the line of our inadequacy. It is the line of our insufficiency. When we embrace the idea that we can't make a difference, and we offer that, and we cross that line of self-reliance, and we cross that line of inadequacy and insufficiency. When we offer our nothing, then we begin to be in the place where God says, I will use you to make a difference. Today I want to talk about what that is, to embrace and to offer our nothing. But before we talk about that, would you pray with me for a moment? Father in heaven, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight, and that you would use your words spoken by your servant, anointed by your Spirit, to challenge us to embrace our inadequacy and to bring to you our nothing. I pray that for myself and for my family, for all of us here, for I ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. So how am I doing? Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, at least in the first two services, there were 2 or 3 people who said, "You're doing great, Dave." And that's not where I wanted the question to go. Have you ever asked yourself that? Have you ever looked in the mirror and said, how am I doing? Ever looked at your professional career, your relationships, your finances, your spiritual life, and really asked, how am I doing? I ask myself that question all the time. I'm compelled by that question. Every Sunday when I finish here, I ask myself, how am I doing? And the answer almost 100% of the time is, you could have done better. You would think after 40 years of doing this and thousands of opportunities to teach in front of people, I would come away once in a while going, nailed it. No. I come away virtually every week going, well, could have been better, could have been stronger, could have been clearer, could have done some more work, it could have been better. How am I doing? I'm not doing as well as I would want to. And it's because my standard is not to be good. My standard is to be perfect. I want to be perfect. And perfection, when you're an artist, and this is an art, is hard to measure. How do you do perfect art? What is the perfect song? What is the perfect story? What is the perfect poem? We don't have a metric. We don't have a metric. You can't bowl 300 or hit 1,000 when it comes to creativity. And in all of our lives, I think there are things that we press into it and we say, how are we doing? And we come away going, I could do better. Not as good as I had hoped, not as well as I had expected. I think all of us are familiar with our own inadequacy. In fact, I believe we are living in a world that constantly reminds us of our inadequacy, that plagues us with constant reminders that we are insufficient. If you don't believe me, just step back from that little myopic, narcissistic bubble that we call our lives and look at the course of the universe and the billions of stars and the countless universes and the billions of years that existed before you showed up and will exist long after you're gone. And if you look at your life, if I look at my life in terms of the movement of human history and the course of humanity and in the grandeur of the universe, I'm a hole in the water. I am smoke in the sky. I am dust in the wind. Even on my best day, I'm barely making any impact at all. And the world that we live in constantly reminds us of this. Let me share with you 5 ways. The world constantly reminds us that none of us is significant enough to really make a difference. The first way the world reminds us is because death always wins. We don't like to come to terms with this, but the reality is our life is basically waking up, doing our best, going to bed, waking up, doing our best, going to bed, waking up, doing our best, going to bed, week after week, month after month, year after year, just so we can live long enough to die. The futility of life is overwhelming. None of us gets out of here alive. Our stories all end the same way. No matter how good you were, no matter how great you were, no matter how influential you are, death always wins. Second thing, the world reminds us of our insignificance, that we don't matter, that we don't make a difference, is because evil is easy. You know how hard it is to be good, to be kind, to be gracious and be loving? That takes work. You know what it takes to be cruel, to be selfish, to be evil? Nothing. It takes no talent, it takes no skill, it takes no discipline. If you do nothing, you will wind up doing nothing good. The world that we live in makes evil easy. Third thing that reminds me of our insignificance is that entropy rules this world. Entropy says that in any closed system, that system left untouched will descend into chaos. And we experience that every day. When you build a house and you stop building the house does not continue to build itself. We are swimming against the stream. We are swimming against the tide. We are pushing the rock uphill, and as long as we are pushing the rock uphill, the rock will move uphill, but as soon as we stop, it will roll back to the bottom where we found it. We live in a world where entropy rules, where if you are not moving forward, you are losing ground. We are walking up the down escalator. Third thing is that pain and poverty are relentless. Pain and poverty are never going to be exhausted. We determine, mathematically, or some calculation is made that we say this is the poverty line, and if you live below this line, you are technically living in poverty. But I promise you, if you make $1 more a year than the person who lives below the poverty line, you'll go, I could use more. From what I've experienced, if you make 10 times the poverty line, you could go, more is better. We are made for more. We are made for perfection. It's what C.S. Lewis identifies as the evidence of heaven, that we are made for a perfect day in a perfect place. We are fashioned for more, and this life will never be enough. And pain and poverty are relentless. Finally, the thing that reminds me that we don't make a difference in this world is that stupidity is infinite. It was Albert Einstein who famously said there are two things in the universe that I believe are infinite: the universe itself and human stupidity. And I am not sure about the former. The capacity that we have to mess things up is unlimited. I know what you're thinking. I got up an hour early for this? Are you serious? I set my clock ahead, I managed to get here, and you are depressing the crap out of me, Dave. This is the most pessimistic thing I have heard in a long time. I didn't need to be reminded of my inadequacy and my shortcomings and my insufficiency. But I think we do. Because our inadequacy is a good thing. Because when we realize we are insufficient and we press into that and we offer to God our nothing, is when we are invited to make a difference beyond our own lives. Now, this is a tough lesson to learn. This is a difficult lesson to learn. Even people who were close to Jesus couldn't learn this lesson. See, 2,000 years ago, in human history, there was a bright, shining moment. It had never happened before, and it has never happened since. In the course of the public life of Jesus, there came a time, and we don't know whether it was for a few weeks or a few months, where perfection reigned. In a particular place in the northern end of the nation of Israel, near the Sea of Galilee, perfect was on display, on full display. All four of the Gospels tell us about this season. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all point to the events that took place during this bright and shining moment. Because during that moment, anyone who came to Jesus with an infirmity, with a deformity, with any debilitating illness, he healed them. He healed anyone who came: the blind, the lame, the deaf, the dumb, the disfigured, the disabled. He healed everyone. And during that time when he was healing all of these people, villages emptied out. Store shops, shop fronts were abandoned, and fields were left to seed. Families moved en masse to find this man, to listen to him, to have him touch them in their infirmities. And perfection was reigning on the earth. During this time, great crowds, tens of thousands of people were flooding to see him. And all four of the gospel writers record what was going on during this time in Matthew chapter 14, in Mark chapter 6, and Luke chapter 9, and John chapter 6. They tell the story. These great crowds had come to have healing experiences and to hear his teaching. And they were gathering in the middle of nowhere. They were in a remote place, and the disciples of Jesus came to him and they said, "Master, you have to send these people home. They haven't had anything to eat in a long time, and they need to go to the villages that are around us because we're in the middle of nowhere, and they need to find some food." And Jesus looks at them and makes a ridiculous statement. He says, "You feed them." And they look at him and they were like, "With what? If we combined our wages for months and months, we would barely have enough to give them any food." It was Philip who pipes up. He says, "If we worked for half of a year and we pulled all of our resources, if we could do that, we would barely have enough to give everyone who is here one single bite of food." It was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, who I think sarcastically said, "Well, here's a boy. He has 5 loaves and 2 fishes. You know how the story goes? You know what happens? Because in comparison with the tens of thousands who were hungry, 5 loaves and 2 fishes was nothing. But Jesus took those 5 loaves and his 2 fish, and as the story is told, he divided the people into groups, and he gave thanks to God for the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and he began to put pieces in baskets and sent the disciples out to distribute it. And as they pulled out a loaf, another one appeared. As they pulled out a fish, another one appeared. And as they went through the crowd, everyone ate. And everyone was filled. And by the time they were done, they returned with 12 baskets full of leftovers. And it says that the crowd was populated by 5,000 men, which means that if they brought their wives and their children, there were between 10 and 15,000 people fed with nothing. Now, this was such an important lesson, so significant for the disciples to understand that it was just a few days later, no more than a few weeks later, that the same thing happened again. Perfection continued to reign in that region of Galilee, and people came to Jesus from all over the region. And word was spreading about what he was doing, and anyone who was sick would travel to find him, and the crowds around him were enormous. And it tells us in the Gospel of Matthew and in the Gospel of Mark that a short time after the 5,000 were fed, Jesus was healing another crowd of people, and he looked at them and said he had compassion on them. Not for their illness, but simply for their daily needs, their daily bread. And he said, I should send these people home, but they've been with me for 3 days. And I'm afraid if I send them home, they'll collapse on the way home. So he says to his disciples, find something for them to eat. And they react in exactly the same way. Even though it had been just days or weeks before, they said, how are we going to do that? Where are we going to get food? And Jesus says, well, what have you got? And they took inventory and they said, we have seven loaves and a handful of fish, more than 2. We have nothing for all of these people. And he said, give it to me. And the same thing happens again. He divides the group, he gives thanks for the bread, he puts it in the baskets, and the disciples distribute it, and everyone ate and had their fill. And when they came back down to him, they had 7 baskets full of leftovers. And it says that the crowd was smaller that day. There were only 4,000 men there, which meant with women and children, there were only 8,000 to 10,000 people fed from nothing. So what is the lesson of the loaves and the fishes? What is a lesson that is so important that Jesus said, I'm going to do this twice so that you don't miss it, so that you get the point. And you don't need to be a theologian to understand what the lesson of the loaves and the fishes is. You don't need to be trained in Greek and Hebrew. You don't need to go to seminary. You don't even need to believe that those 2 stories were true. The lesson of the loaves and the fishes is obvious. Give me your nothing, and I will make everything of it. Give God what you think is your inadequacy and your insufficiency. Embrace your shortcomings and offer it to me, and I will use it in ways you cannot imagine. Give me your nothing, and I will do amazing things with it. Now, we don't like learning this lesson. This is not a lesson that's easy for me to learn. I don't think it's easy for any of us to learn, because we are the boy with the 5 fishes, with the 5 loaves. We're that kid. Back in the feeding of the 5,000, Andrew finds a boy. We don't know who he was. He had 5 loaves and 2 fish. He had 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he says, yeah, we're going to feed 15,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's nothing. But to that boy, it was everything. To that boy, that may have been the food for his family for a week. That was all he had. It was insufficient to feed the masses. It was nothing by comparison to the need, until he gave it, and it was multiplied, and it became everything. It's a hard lesson for us to learn because we don't like to let go of this stuff. We don't like to let go of our children. We don't like to let go of our careers. We don't like to admit that the things that we are searching for in life, that perfection that drives us, is unattainable. We don't like to get to the point where we let go of it. We can acknowledge it, but can I offer it? It's such an important lesson that in between the two miracles, in between the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000, probably a day or two after the feeding of the 5,000, there's another miracle that takes place. It's recorded for us in Matthew, Mark, and John. And it tells us that Jesus sent his disciples out in a boat. He said, you guys go to the other side of the lake. I need some time away from you and from the crowds. I need some me time. And so I will meet you on the other side. I'll walk by myself. You guys get in the boat and go to the other side of the lake. And he sends them off. And it says that they were rowing for 3 or 4 miles, and the wind was against them. And these were experienced sailors on the Sea of Galilee, but they were struggling. It had taken them all day, and they were only 3 or 4 miles from shore. They were hardly close to their destination, when suddenly out on the horizon, they saw a head bobbing above the waves. And they probably thought, that guy's standing in the boat, what's he doing? And then he got closer and they said, that guy's not even in a boat. And as he got closer, it says that they were terrified. And he came up to the boat and he said, don't be afraid, don't be afraid, I'm here. Famously, Matthew records that Peter is the one who says, hey, if that's really you, Jesus, let me walk on the water with you. Call me out of the boat. I want to do that thing too. That looks awesome. And barefoot water skiing was invented right there. He gets out of the boat and he walks over to Jesus, and as soon as he sees the clouds and the storms and the waves, he begins to sink. He becomes afraid, and Jesus reaches down and he grabs him. He says, save me, Lord. And Jesus reaches out and he says, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt me? Why do you have so little faith? And there's a lesson here that I will preach until the day I die. And it's basically the lesson that if you want to make a difference, you got to get out of the boat. You got to get out of your boat. You got to put your feet over the side. Come on. Get out of your little claustrophobic life. You got to stretch yourself. You got to try walking on the water once in a while. But that's not the lesson that he wanted them to learn. It's only Mark. In Mark chapter 6, verse 52, he tells us the lesson we are supposed to learn. And it's the lesson of all of the miracles. It's the lesson of how to make a difference in the world that we live in. It says that they were afraid because they didn't understand the message of the loaves and the fishes. Everything began with that. Everything they were to understand began with the lessons of the loaves and the fishes. And Mark says their hearts were too hard to let that in. What was the lesson of the loaves and the fishes? Give me your nothing. Embrace your insufficiency, embrace your inadequacy, offer me your nothing, and I will make everything of it. It is the invitation of God to be a part of a message of hope and a message of grace and a message of transformation in the world that we live in the day in which we live, in the universe in which we live, that we cannot make on our own. And he says, give me what you've got. And when you give it to me, you will participate with me in the transformation of human history. That's where you will make a difference, when you learn the lesson of the loaves. Give me your nothing. We live in a world that constantly reminds us of our inadequacy. It is relentless in reminding us that we're not good enough. I mean, if you are a professional, if you are a surgeon and you do everything right in the case and in the procedure and all of your steps are right, you can still have a poor outcome. If you are a teacher and you present the material perfectly and flawlessly to your students and you make it perfectly clear and they still don't get it, you can be a coach and you can coach up your team and give them all the wisdom that they need and they can still lose, because we live in a world where death always wins and evil is easy and entropy rules the world that we live in. And pain and poverty are relentless, and stupidity is infinite. And at every turn, we are reminded of our inadequacy so that we might press into it and cross that line and offer him our nothing. Because when we offer him our nothing, he does everything with it. So how am I doing? I appreciate that affirmation, but the way I will know how I am doing is if you come back tonight at 5 o'clock. Because it'll be perfect. But I know it doesn't work that way. I know that's not how it works. Some of you have things to do, places to go, people to see. Some of you are just passing through. Some of you don't care. This is more church than you've had in years. You don't need a double dose. But I know that this is what I've got for you, is this invitation to bring your nothing. And I believe that God will work in ways that I will never know. But there may be one of you who will come back and tonight you will hear a story and it will change your life. Or you will come and you will be generous in a way you've never been generous before, and you will make an investment, and through that investment, an entire community in South America will be changed. And no one will applaud for you, and no one will say thank you to you, and I will never know that because of my invitation, you made that expression and that generosity was used. It doesn't work that way. He comes to us on the water and he says, do you understand? I'm inviting you to do what I do. I'm inviting you to give me your nothing so that I can do everything with it. And that's what this is about tonight. That's what we're going to celebrate. We're going to celebrate the men and the women in this community who are offering their nothing, and God is doing amazing things with it. We're going to celebrate that. We're going to applaud that. But make no mistake about it, I want you to bring your lunch, because I'm going to ask you for it. I want you to bring your 5 loaves and your 2 fishes, what you think is your inadequacy, what you think doesn't make a difference. I'm going to invite you to offer it tonight. That's what we're going to do. We're going to come together and we're going to have a party. And I'm going to make a big ask. And I'm going to say, get out of the boat and offer him your nothing. And we're going to see where God is going to take us. So I hope you join me tonight at 5 o'clock. Because it's going to be awesome.